Good morning. Tonight is the first yard site of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And I'd like to share a Dvar Torah, an insight from this week's Torah portion in his memory. This week's Torah portion is Chayei Sarah. Abraham loses his beloved wife Sarah at the age of 127 years. Abraham is 10 years older and he is 137 years old. And here we find something fascinating. God had made 3 promises to Abraham. Promise number 1 was, your children will be like the stars in the heaven. Promise number 2 is that I will give them the land of Israel. Promise number 3 was that you will be the father of many nations. Here is Abraham burying his wife at the age of 127, while he is 137 years old. And let's see how many of these promises were fulfilled. As far as the land of Israel, he does not own any part of the land of Israel. As far as the promise that your children will be like the stars in the heaven, he only has 1 child, Isaac, who's not even married. And as far as the 3rd promise, you'll be the father of many nations, at this point he only has 2 children and he isn't the father of any nations yet. But look what happens to Abraham. He goes and he acquires the cave of Machpelah, the first piece of land that he owns in the land of Israel. After burying his wife in the cave of Machpelah, he goes on to arrange for the shidduch, the marriage of his son Isaac to Rebekah. And then he remarries at the end of this week's Torah portion, fathering another additional 6 children, bringing his children to 8 children in total. And here we find a fascinating insight to this week's Torah portion by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. He says, what does it mean to have faith in God? Faith in God doesn't mean you wait for God to fulfill all of his promises to you. Remember what God told Abraham? Hitalech lefanai, walk ahead of me. Faith means that you're willing to do the work necessary to walk ahead of God and bring about God's promises. When Abraham looked at his situation in life, he didn't have a crisis of faith. He said, no, it's a call to action. If God promised me the land of Israel, now I need to go acquire the first piece of land. If God told me my children will be like the stars in heaven, I need to marry off Isaac so I could have grandchildren. And if God told me I'll be the father of many nations, I need to have additional children. So he remarries and has 6 more children. And this is the lesson of Abraham to each and every one of us. In life, God wants us to take initiative, to walk before him. And faith doesn't mean that God will do everything for you. It means that you can partner with God in bringing about all of God's visions, promises, and dreams for your life. This week in Israel, a man passed away at the age of 100. His name was David Sampolimsky. David Sampolimsky passed away at 100 years old. He was born in 1921. And when he died, he had left behind 10 children, 83 grandchildren, hundreds of great-grandchildren, and over 30 great-great-grandchildren. That's his grandchildren's grandchildren. Who is this man, David Sampolimsky? He was a microbiologist, and he was the head of the microbiology lab at Maynei HaYeshua Hospital in Israel, as well as a professor, the head of microbiology at Bar Ilan University. But his story begins in 1921 when he was born in Copenhagen in Denmark. And it was 1943 when the Nazis were about to invade Denmark. And so Jews started to flee to Sweden. And we know that 90% of the 9,000 Jews who lived in Copenhagen, in Denmark, managed to survive the Holocaust. His own parents got a ship to Sweden, but he said, I can't leave yet. He was a 22-year-old medical student. He said, I need to help the Jews get out. And he went door to door rounding up Jews before the Nazis invaded and getting them onto fishermen's boats to go to Sweden. And he would raise money to pay the fishermen to get the Jewish people out of Copenhagen. And this David Sampolimsky is credited for saving over 700 Jews from Denmark, from the Nazis. And he did many heroic things. including as a medical student. He went to the hospital, and those patients who couldn't get out, he put signs on their doors saying they're in quarantine, they're contagious, so the Nazis won't go in. There was a woman who was pregnant, and she couldn't leave, so he hid her in an attic, and only after the baby was born and a week old, he took her to the ship and got her over to Sweden and saved her life. And that daughter that was born is now living in Israel in Petach Tikva. And when he did everything he can, he was about to leave, and he heard that there was an orphanage with Jewish children. He went to the orphanage and rounded up the 12 Jewish children in the orphanage, took them to a boat, and he left Denmark with these 12 children in a fisherman's boat and made his way to Sweden. This is a man who maintained his faith till his dying day at the age of 100. He was a Torah scholar. He was an observant Jew. He went through so much, but he never lost his faith. And like Abraham, he said, "Hitalech lefanai," I will walk ahead of God. I will be faithful, and I will bring about God's promise by partnering with God and realizing His mission, His vision, His dream for humanity. When we look around the world and we see so much darkness, we should not become discouraged or have a crisis of faith. We should realize God calls on us to partner with Him in bringing about His vision and dream for humanity, a world of peace, a world of loving kindness. Have a wonderful day.